check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Friends, welcome to another episode of Culture Conversations. I'm here with my homie, Stephen Crenshaw of 20 Schemes and Church in Hard Places with Acts 29. But he also pastors a church. Steve, what's your church called?
Man, we're in the sticks of Kentucky, brother. We're Victory Baptist Church.
And you guys brew your own bourbon, right? Like you have a bourbon cellar?
Well, we're right outside of Bardstown, so it's the bourbon capital of the world.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
I grew up on Jim Beam's property. My dad pastors a church literally right outside of Jim Beam.
Oh, so, for real?
Yeah, it
was in your bottle as a baby.
Bro, you can smell it in the air. You can just get a little taste.
Oh man. So how are you not an alcoholic? That's a good question.
Grace of God.
Yes. So bro, before we jump in, I want to capture your story. You have such an interesting story. But man, so you and I attend Grimke Seminary together and we get to kick it twice a semester, hang out a bit. We first met though at the airport, if you remember, in Syracuse, New York. You were presenting 20 Schemes at a Shepherd the Flock conference, and you and MSD were there, and Scott Prentice and I were in the airport, and you guys just happened to show up in the same terminal that was empty. It was like us and no one else, and we got a ticket. So that was cool, man.
And then the next week I was just rooming with you guys.
I know.
It was weird.
It was providential is what it was. But brother, you have such a unique journey. So we were eating German at a Grimke intensive there in Richmond, Virginia. And you told a story about you and Matthew Spangler Davis. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Spangler Davison.
Okay. Davison. Yeah. Davison. Okay. MSD for short. You were in Africa. And when you go to Africa, you have to go on safari. So you were on safari and you told us this crazy story, man. You want to open with that story?
Yeah, man. So we were in Zimbabwe. So I've been in Africa twice this year, but the second trip we were in Zimbabwe and doing some training with some guys out in the bush. And one of the last days we're headed up towards Victoria Falls and we go out on this camp. It's called Iganyana, I think. And so we go out on this camp and there's just immediately massive herds of elephants walking around. But man, we rolled up in there and it was weird because there's all these guys with like heavy guns, like automatics. And I'm like, okay, here we go. So we step out into the bush and they're like, hey, there's been a lot of predators here. This is the first thing they tell me, right? And I'm from Kentucky, man. We got like bears. I'm like, but there's like nothing right out here. So we come out and he's like, man, there's been a lot of predators out in the camp this year. He's like, last night we had lions just roaming through the camp. So don't go out after dark. They give us all these rules and they're like, just be careful. We're going to have a guard walking with you. And we're like, okay, cool. This herd of water buffalo were moving through the area. About 800 of them were moving through. And they gave us a whistle, man. So they put us in a tent at night and they said, hey, if a lion comes inside your tent, blow the whistle. And so I had to clarify because that's just me. So I'm like, okay, if he's on the outside of the tent, do I blow the whistle? He's like, no, you'll just attract it. Said, just blow the whistle if he's inside the tent. I said, okay, got it. So lion outside the tent, don't blow the whistle. Inside the tent, blow the whistle. And so there was a guard who was going to stay up all night. But man, it was crazy. So about 4 a.m., like I'm dead asleep. And then just right outside the tent, man, we just start hearing all these lions just start roaring and calling back left and right. And MSD is all like under his blanket, just trying to he's just freaking out. And dude, it was one of those moments. It's like, it's just surreal. It's like, oh, dude, you don't know if it's going to come in. You don't know how close they are. And in the morning, kind of went outside and just paw prints just everywhere. So they just moved through the camp again that night. And it's just wild, man. It's just one of those moments you just won't forget.
Were you able to go back to sleep?
So that was about 4 a.m. And we actually had a game drive at like 6 a.m. I don't think I went back to sleep. I was like, and man, honestly, there were some huge old spiders up in there. So I was like, I was more terrified of one of them things crawling in my mouth at night.
Oh man, were they in your tent?
Yeah, they were everywhere.
Oh, geez.
Like I was right before I went to bed, I was just standing there, and then I just saw like fingers. It was like just big spider legs, just move, bro. And I'm just, I'm a country boy. A country boy can survive, but bro, I was petrified.
Tarantulas are not your deal in Kentucky.
No, sir.
Man, thanks for telling that story, bro. So you have come into ministry in a very unique way. Maybe we could start here by you telling your story of coming to faith, but then also how did you become a pastor of a church? It's such a unique story.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with my just my story of coming to faith. So my parents have been believers. I came out of the womb singing Amazing Grace. My mom is like the sweetest lady, and my dad has just been a faithful pastor, 27 years at the same church.
Wow.
My dad's always said that this church is going to take me out in a straitjacket or a coffin. And so he's been in the trenches. And so it's very faithful parents, gave me room to fail, gave me grace, gave me love, and just literally lived out the gospel. But I got saved pretty young, like most PKs, made just a very quick decision. But then really around the age 13, 14, had a pretty big faith crisis where I kind of figured, if my dad were a Jew, devout Jew, my mom were devout Jew, I'd probably be a devout Jew. If my parents were devout Muslim, I'd probably be a Muslim. And so just kind of logically, I started really contemplating, is my faith my own? Is this thing that I have with God, is it real, or am I just a product of living in the South in America? Am I just a product of my parents? Am I just a product of the culture around me? And that's, I really struggled very young with that.
How old do you think you were?
Man, I was probably 13, 14, just coming in, teenage years, and just really struggling, and wasn't really sure if like it was real, man, that's when God in his grace just did a work in me. So I remember reading ask, seek, and knock, right? And I will answer, but you must search for me with all your heart. And so I for the first time really in my life, I began to ask God for something, like, Lord, how do I know you're real? Because I remember Paul saying, like, this is either real or it's not. Mm-hmm. And if it's not real, eat, drink, and party, for tomorrow we die. But if it is real, go, all the way. And so I was just right there, man, where I didn't want to play the game. I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I didn't want to just say I believe, but not actually do it. And so I just really began to seek God. And man, this is when it gets weird. It was like 4 a.m. one day. In Hebrews. And so
pause for 1 second, bro. You just cut out at the opportune time. So back up to this gets weird, because that's where you cut out.
Okay. Yeah. So things got weird. I went to bed, and it was about 4 a.m, and I heard a whisper into my ear that said, it's in Hebrews. So I jumped out of my bed. I ran to my parents' room. I was shaken to my core. Ran to my parents' room. I was like, Dad, there's someone in my room. My dad comes running in there in his whitey tighties. Sorry, Dad. He comes running in there. He's like, there's no one in here. He goes back to bed. I remember laying there that night going, what was that? It's in Hebrews. I was terrified. And just the next day, man, I just remembered that there's a book in the Bible called Hebrews. And so I just opened it up, landed on chapter 11, and started reading by faith Abraham, by faith Noah, by faith Moses, right? All this, the great hall of faith. Started really reading that and started thinking about, faith apart from sight. And I wasn't convinced. I heard the whisper. It was sharp. It was clear. And I was just like, you know what? That could have been the burrito I ate last night. Right. That could have been me knowing Hebrews, trying to tell myself in my sleep to try to soothe some kind of moral, spiritual crisis that I'm having. I told myself in my sleep to go to Hebrews. And so I was so convinced. And then that's when God finished me off the next day. Just the light bulb of all light bulbs went off when I opened my Bible to Matthew chapter 10, verse 27. And it says, whatever I whisper into your ear at night, shout from the rooftops. When I read that verse, it's almost as if the world stopped. And for the first time in my life, there was such a clarity and a real deep belief that Jesus is actually God. He is actually real. And he's actually only pleased with people who come to him by faith, Amen. Not by sight. And man, that set me on a path, a trajectory. Right around 14, I started getting really heavily involved with FCA. I just went all the way.
Fellowship of Christian Athletes, for those who don't know.
Yep, Fellowship of Christian Athletes in high school. Started leading devotionals, prayers at the flagpole, bro. I went in, and so that's when my faith really began to take shape. My parents, huge credit to them for just being faithful and really sharing the gospel with me and living the gospel in my home. My sisters are amazing. They're all in ministry today.
Wow. How many siblings do you have?
I have 2 sisters. I'm the baby, okay. And all their husbands faithfully serve in the church. And I couldn't be more blessed with the family that I've been given. But so right after there, high school, I start a youth pastor job at this church I'm at now. So I'm young. I'm like 19. I look like one of the youth. Take the youth to youth camp, and they're all telling me to go to class because they think I'm one of the students. I was so young, didn't know what I was doing. Small church, country church, and so about a couple of years in, 4 years in, my senior pastor, his name's Tony Stamps. He's diagnosed with cancer, and Tony. Me and him had a great relationship. He was one of my dad's best friends. He has a handicapped daughter named Ashley Stamps, who can't really walk or talk, and so you have to feed her and take care of her. And so just a really hard situation. And so while Tony was sick, I began to preach and fulfill the pulpit while he was out. And then when he passed away, the church called me at a pretty young age to pastor the church.
How old were you?
So I was about 24.
Wow, Spurgeon, yeah. Man.
No, sir. No Spurgeon here. Maybe like his redneck step cousin or something like that. Yeah. But man, it was a really hard situation. So I kind of came into the pastorate through kind of pain. And but man, his wife Terry, she's on my staff right now. She's the strongest and most amazing woman that I know, man. She is just committed and passionate and still serving the church and just getting it done. And so that's kind of my faith story. And then I've been at the same church ever since.
Wow. So not how old, but what year was this that your senior pastor passed away and you became the senior pastor? What year was this?
So that was around some 32. So around 20, I don't know. Can't remember. I'm horrible with dates, bro.
Me too, man. Okay.
I'm like the worst.
Not 2020.
Definitely not 2020. I don't know, like 2012, 13, something around there.
So it's been about a decade for you since you've been.
Yeah. So I've been at the church about 12 years now.
Yeah. Wow, man. That is a unique story, brother. So you basically had to wrestle your way through without really training or without experience. Your dad was a pastor, so I'm sure you were able to lean on him.
Yeah, for sure. So my dad's the best seminary I've ever had. Just watched him, grew up going into the hospital rooms with him, listening to him preach. He's a phenomenal preacher, takes it very serious, has always studied the word. So I definitely had a leg up because of him.
Yeah. That's very providential, man, that you can probably lean on him in hard situations. From the outside looking in, pastoring can seem sometimes glorious and awesome and excellent. But once you're on the inside of it, it's a lot of struggle. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of suffering. It's a lot of trouble. Right. If you don't have people to lean on and coaches and counselors and peers, man, you drown. So it's very providential that you were probably able to lean on your dad a lot, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And I didn't have any, I knew ministry was going to be horrible. Like, not horrible as in like, the worst job you could ever have, but I knew it was difficult. Most rewarding job you could have, but definitely I just knew that how difficult church was. Just watching my dad, but still, felt called to do it. And I didn't want to. And like growing up, I was like, I just don't want to be a pastor. I don't want to be a pastor. And then God is like, yeah, you want to do. So yeah, this is what you're doing. So
wow, man. So interestingly, you somehow found your way into a ministry based in Scotland. I believe Mez McConnell is the founder of 20 Schemes. Can you talk about, one, what is 20 Schemes? And then two, how did you get kind of into that ministry?
Yeah, so MSD and Mez met via Mark Dever in 2012. Both had a heart for Scotland. Matthew moved here to Louisville, Kentucky to go to seminary, and God called him to plant a church here in Bardstown. That's why we have a U.S. headquarters in Kentucky for Scotland. I know it's really weird. It's very confusing for people. So they had a heart for it, met, and then 20 Schemes was birthed from there. And so 20 Schemes is a ministry that plants and revitalizes churches in the poorest communities of Scotland. Schemes are government housing. We would call them projects here in the States. Schemes are located on the outskirts of the cities there, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Inverness, up north. And so the hope is in the name. So 20 Schemes, we want to plant 20 churches in 20 schemes across Scotland that will become autonomous church planting churches. And that's the goal. And we're around 8 churches right now with a big vision to plant out west in Glasgow, one of the most densely populated cities there in Scotland. And there's about 97 schemes in Glasgow alone. Wow. 97. And none of these have gospel witnesses. Scotland is less than 2% evangelical Christian. So it's really an unreached people group at this point. You're more likely now, I think the scales in UK just tipped. You're more likely to meet, if you talk to someone on the street, they're most likely an atheist. And it's trended that way. So Scotland's kind of Christian heritage has halved every decade since 1950, and it has tanked. And America is seemingly following suit there. So the need is to revitalize Scotland, and, the great reformers, John Knox, we have the great missionaries, Mary Slessor, David Livingston coming out of Scotland. And so the hope and the plan is to bring the light of the gospel to the poorest communities in Scotland. And so most of the people that we are planting with have been abused. They have maybe been the abuser. They've all come from trauma or maybe criminal backgrounds or just poverty. And so we know that we don't want to just alleviate poverty. We want to, the spiritual poverty that's going on there in Scotland. So the solution is a gospel preaching church, and that's what we want to plant.
Man, that's beautiful. You forgot McShane, bro, and Ferguson and Alistair Begg. You forgot.
Dude, bro, the list goes on. And then, you think about actors that come out of Scotland, bro. We got James McAvoy. You got Gerard Butler. You got, it's crazy. There's a lot of talent that's come out of Scotland.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then I went on a vision trip with 20 Schemes just because I knew Matthew. I wanted to support one of the church plants there, and so I went on a vision trip with 20 Schemes, support a church.
What is the vision trip? Before you go further.
Yeah, so vision trip is just come and see the work. So a group of pastors from the States will go twice a year, just to walk the schemes, get to know Mez, get to know some of the church planners, and then see how they can partner with the churches. And so really church to church, it's an adoption. You'll adopt a church and you'll have a relationship with them, communication. If you send teams, they'd go to that church, then you would know that scheme, and then you'd really it's just partnership from there on. And so good gospel partnership. And so that's what I did, partnered with Merkinch. And man, when I was in Scotland, I just remember feeling like, Lord, I want to help more than just a partnership, but I didn't know what that meant. And then a couple years later, it just worked out. I just started working for him. So So I've been with 20 Schemes for about 2 years now and deal with kind of partnership development, helping churches connect with churches in Scotland and then building those relationships together.
And you travel a lot. You were just north of Pittsburgh, I believe, in Newcastle, right? Recently?
Yes, sir. I'll be in Syracuse next week again with Mike.
You travel like once a week, don't you? I mean, you're out.
No, it's like not like MSD travel, but it's been about usually like twice a month.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're going to these churches, various churches that want to maybe explore a vision trip. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, just sort of partnership. If they, just getting more information and really letting people, because when people think mission trips, they think, a lot of third world countries, they think about other places. In Scotland, like in the UK itself, is just, it's so dark. It's a beautiful country, but it is spiritually dark. And so I kind of go and help educate the church on 20 Schemes and what they can do and how they can partner. And so I spent a lot of time traveling in that regard, and then going to conferences and setting up a booth and just trying to talk to pastors and mission teams wherever I can.
Yeah, you represent 20 Schemes. So I'm looking for, bro, a 20 Schemes t-shirt at least before I go over with you.
Bro, I'll get you some swag. I'll swag you up.
So, bro, I want to hit on something that you just mentioned. In Pittsburgh, we have not schemes, but we have quite a few projects, and our church is in one of the depressed parts of Pittsburgh. So we deal with a lot of trauma, a lot of people who either are wrestling with drugs or have in their past. And it's interesting that poverty and drugs and violence and broken families kind of all go together. And it seems like that's the flavor of the schemes, is you just have so much brokenness, but it's all webbed and meshed together. It's not one thing. It's usually they're all kind of a big tangled mess. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And there's just, and I think we just identify it as socioeconomic problems that just cause a lot of tension, a lot of, just ongoing issues. So like for people in the schemes, the difference between projects and schemes is in the schemes, they don't want to leave. They don't want to get out. They're not trying to get out of their situation. A lot of what they have comes from the government. They're not really incentivized to leave. And it's also their family. Their family lives there. Their parents have lived there, and it's home. They wouldn't consider it as a bad place. About 48% of all Scotland, natives live in schemes.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
So about 50% of Scotland lives in these project houses.
That's right. Government housing facilities. Yeah. So, and that's just the truth. It's home, and so about 45% of the people that live in those schemes are unemployed. And so there's just a lot of just issues that kind of happen and create itself there. We deal with, racism here in the States, and they deal with a different type, which is more class system based. So, you have benefits class, middle class, upper middle class, and then, guys like me and you, royalty, at the top of the chain.
Meanwhile, in the States, we would be lower middle class.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If that.
Right.
So there's just a host of issues. A lot of the things when, we're sharing the gospel with people, it's where was God when I was being abused? Where was God when I was being raped? Where was he then? And so working through the gospel, and we know the gospel is the only hope. And so we know that the gospel can do miraculous things. And so that's why we want to plant. That's the long-term vision. And, 20 Schemes churches are small. We're in it for the great grandchildren. Our measures of success as a church planting organization isn't how many people did you baptize and how many life changes have you seen. It's, did you go and did you stay? Did you stay in the area? Did you love the people? Even though it wasn't reciprocated, even though maybe no one's coming into the church, did you stay in an area, and are you committed to them? One of our church planners, his name's Gerald White. He always says that, he moved to the scheme and he wants to bring his coffin with him. And that's really what we need, is people to move into the broken communities and to stay there, to see the gospel do its work.
Wow. Yeah, man, that's legitimate. And just so people can understand kind of maybe Scotland is primarily one ethnicity, right? It's not like the States.
Yeah.
People could get a demographic idea of what that looks like.
Yeah, you would, majority are white. But there are certain schemes that have immigrants that have been moving into them. Okay. And so some of the schemes are more diverse than others. Okay. And so we do a lot of training with the church planner and the pastors and the teams that move in to really understand the scheme that they're moving into, and then the people that they are going to represent.
So each scheme is almost like its own culture.
It is. It's its own.
Understand. Yeah.
So it's its own culture, and they won't leave their scheme to go to another one. So, which is Mez's church in Edinburgh, Nidri Community Church. It borders Bingham. That's literally less than a mile away. And so we have to plant a church in Bingham because the people will not walk across the street into Nidri. They're going to stay in that community. So if there's 97 schemes in Glasgow and no one's going to leave their specific scheme, they're going to stay there. They have a grocery store, they got a school system, they got their own thing in their own scheme, then they're not going to walk across to the other one. They're not going to leave. So our vision has to be each scheme needs a gospel planting church, a gospel church. So there's a lot of work.
Yeah, there is a lot of work, man. It's legit. And you, though not technically in Acts 29 yet, share that vision of God's strategy to reach the world is healthy churches, planting healthy churches.
Absolutely.
To preach the gospel. Yeah, I love that. So let's move on. We'll probably jump back and forth, but let's move on to Church in Hard Places. So how did you, one, what is Church in Hard Places? And then two, how did you get involved in that organization?
Yeah, so Matthew and Mez, while planting churches in Scotland, have kind of had a DNA of how to plant churches in poor context. And so from that, we've seen a couple of church planting initiatives happen. We call them 20 Schemes Inspired church planting initiatives. One would be New England church planting, and one would be in Newfoundland, Canada. It's called Mile One Mission, Stephen Bray. And so there's these church planting initiatives that has kind of happened. And so Matthew and Mez said, man, there's a big global need to train pastors in poor communities to see the gospel go to where people aren't going to these, sexy areas. They're going out into the slums in Nairobi or wherever. And so from that, Matthew and Mez started kind of a global church planting organization. And then they linked up ultimately with Acts 29. And so they've called that Acts 29 Church in Hard Places. And that's where it's kind of cohort based. You identify a group of pastors in these poor communities or just under-resourced communities. They will do training with them. And it's really to help them maybe potentially be assessed as a Acts 29 church planter one day. Because some of these guys are not going to have seminary. They don't have the resources. Right. They just need guys to help walk them through and they get them ready. And so that's kind of what Matthew is a executive director over Church in Hard Places. He's kind of over the Acts 29 Global. And so I don't technically work for Matthew, but I've done on the Acts 29 Church in Hard Places side, but I do work through them and have done trips with them, and it has helped him because our office here in Kentucky, the bottom floor is Scotland, 20 Schemes, and then you go upstairs and we have kind of Church in Hard Places. We have two different staffs here that are working kind of globally and then for Scotland, and then it all kind of sometimes just will mesh. But
nice. So brother, we have a partnership. Our church has a partnership with University Community Church in Gulu, Uganda. It's northern Uganda, just below South Sudan. And we went last year and did a pastor's training conference during COVID, and 17 of those 40 men are in Church in Hard Places doing the very same thing you're talking about. So they get digital books, then they meet on Zoom or a like platform, and then they kind of talk through what they're learning, and then they write a paper based on whatever book they're reading. And I think they just finished What is the Gospel by Greg Gilbert. So they're just starting.
Yeah. And then at the intensives, so they'll meet at least once a year, where they will preach, and so they can get feedback, and they will also present a church planning strategy. And then we can kind of critique that and then help them think that in their own context.
That's helpful. That's really
and
helpful.
really we're trying to train Indigenous guys to train Indigenous guys. And that's really the goal is like, we don't want to be just the people that come in, do all this stuff and then leave. We want to see Indigenous leaders rise up, do the training and learn, and then move on from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I heard MSD on a podcast with Tony Merida one time talk about how guys in these kind of developing nations or church in hard places, even in the United States, they don't learn the same way as your traditional seminary, attendees. They don't get reading the book and then, writing the papers and doing the exams and whatnot. It's more hands-on. It's almost apprentice-like. Have you seen that being more of an effective learning tool than your traditional forms of seminary and school?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the guys in Kenya had different needs than the guys in Zimbabwe, and different areas that we thought we needed to focus on. And so some of the guys have only heard prosperity gospel, and they don't know that what they're hearing and preaching is false, because they've never been told. This is all that they've heard. And so we want to gently help show them the truth of the gospel and help them preach it and know it. And so a lot of that is Zoom calls. It's one-to-one, it's conversations, having them think through some theological, questions in depth, and then working from there. So we don't just want to say, oh, this is a prosperity guy. He doesn't know what he's saying, and let's get rid of him. No, he needs help. He needs training. He needs someone to come alongside of him and help show him. And not all the guys stay with us. Some of them leave, but man, I can't tell you how many stories there are of men who have come from these under-resourced areas, who have gotten some of this training and are just on a trajectory to do some amazing things for the Lord. And so it's an amazing thing to see. So there's apprentices everywhere. On every continent, and God's just doing some amazing things. Yeah,
I heard MSD in another talk he was giving say, just because someone is teaching false doctrine doesn't mean they're a false teacher. It might mean they think this is Christianity. They have no other view of the scriptures other than this kind of framework that they've been given.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's their context, right? Yeah. It's coming out of that.
Yeah, man. So bro, I'm now curious, how do you do all that you do, man? Like, how do you, because you're also a husband and a father, man. So tell us about your family.
Yeah. So my wife, Brittany, she's amazing. I definitely could not do what I do without her. She is independent. She is smart, brilliant, and man, she can handle some things, bro. Like she calms me down. You know what I'm saying? I'm the one that gets like flustered and crazy and things are going nuts. And then she's like, whoa, you should just breathe. You should just chill. So God knew exactly what he was doing when he put us together. And she's my best friend and she's amazing. And then I got 3 little kids, Riley, Lincoln, and Danny, 2 girls and a boy. And so 8, 6, and 3. And so they're fun. And that is the hardest thing, to be away from them, for sure. It doesn't matter if I'm away from them from a day or a week. It's painful. And so I don't enjoy leaving them. I don't enjoy being on the road all the time, but I do, want to fulfill kind of the role and the call that God has for me, and want to, treat my family, treat them well. And so it's a balancing act, and I'm not always the best at it. And I think I don't want to lie. I think a lot of guys are like, I'm a high capacity guy and I've got everything together. Well, often my life is a mess, and I'm trying to I really use my time well, and to, dawn till sunset, you got all these hours to really be intentional with the time. And so that's one thing that my schedule in life has made me do, is made me be really intentional about my family, intentional about my church, intentional about everything that I'm doing. Because if I slack or I'm not really focused in on something, everything just kind of gets a bit crazy. So, God's been gracious, taught me some lessons along the way, faithful wife. And then my church, man, I have guys that will preach, a church that loves me and it supports the mission, supports what I'm doing and supports, man, they just love us. And so I am blessed beyond measure with the church that I have and the family that I have.
Love it. Yeah, man. It seems like God has really placed you in a unique position to do what you do. I know from just knowing a bunch of guys and having a family myself with 3 kids, you have to have those dynamics in place in order for you to do what you do. The wife of the pastor or church planter or missionary or whatever, you guys have to be the team. It's not like you're doing separate things. You guys are together in the same mission. It's just her role looks a little different and your role looks a little different, but you, as you said, couldn't do it without her. Yeah, she's vital. And so my fruit is her fruit, honestly. I mean, she gets just as much credit for anything that the Lord does through me is through her, because we're one. And so, but at the same time, man, I'm always trying to go, Lord, I can spend more time with them. Or when I'm in the room with them, it's really taught me, and I'm kind of blessed for this lesson, but when I'm in the room is to be present with them in the room. Instead of being on your phone instead of being on the phone. I like to play some Warzone. I ain't going to lie. I like to jump on some Call of Duty. Like to play guitar. I like to go play basketball. I'm a big sports guy. But man, being intentional and with the time that I have with them has really made me appreciate them more. That's good, man. I appreciate that. What would you say to any young aspiring pastors, church planters, missionaries, any young guys who are hyped about ministry? What counsel would you give them? Oh man, there's a lot of guys that come into seminary that haven't had the examples in their life. They don't really know what pastoral ministry is like. They ask the questions, they hear the responses, but until you get kicked in the teeth yourself, you're not sure how you're going to respond. It's like UFC, you got to get rocked a couple times in the cage and then you can kind of adjust and reassess, but we can't perform that in the classroom. So I think a lot of guys come in pretty sure of themselves and then they go through some trouble, they go through some trials, and then they come back to reality. And my thing is just, man, is be flexible. You got to be okay with flexibility in ministry. There's no really set schedule. It's your life. It's ingrained in who you are. And use your time well. And really all the books that you're reading and learning, if you're doing all this stuff, you're taking in all this knowledge, but it's not connecting with the heart or the hands, then there's an issue there. So if with all your knowledge, you're not able to share the gospel with someone in Walmart or you don't, that's, there's an issue there. So it's really for pastors. I tell them, one, connect with your people, listen more than you speak when you're in conversation with them, get to know their heart, learn how to read a room. I think a lot of guys struggle with that. Learn how to, when you're in a meeting and know what to say, when not to say it. I made a lot of mistakes early, but reading the room, knowing your people, and prayer is vital to the life of the pastor. If you're reading more than you're praying, you probably got that backwards. You need to be more dependent upon the Spirit and trust in Him who's given you your next breath. Trust in Him for the life that you have. And then in His strength and in His power and in His will, study the Word and then administer the Word to His people. That's good, man. I appreciate that. So if people want to find out about either 20 Schemes or Church in Hard Places, or man, they're even interested in becoming a partner, how would they do that? Yeah, go to 20schemes.com. You can email me anytime, Stephen.Crenshaw@20schemes.com. Would love to talk with anybody about Scotland or even Church in Hard Places or just Grimke Seminary. It's a great seminary. And I think other guys, guys who just want to learn how to pastor, man, that's a great place for them to go and do that at. And so, yeah, shoot me an email. Go check out our website. We're on all the social media channels, just 20 Schemes, anything. And you'll find us on YouTube and Instagram, and you can get as much information as you want. Awesome. Brother, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man and you're intentional with your time. So thank you for spending this time with us. It's really appreciated.
Love you, Chris. You the man, bro. I didn't hip hop. Hilarious. I love this dude. You're a good guy, man.
Love you too, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're gonna have to do some hip hop someday here. We'll write some graffiti together. We'll go bomb.
Bro, let's mix it up. I'm ready.
Cool. Love you, bro.
See you, bro.